Did you know that Joan of Arc was friends with one of the most evil men in history? The truth of his deeds weren't discovered until after her death, but they were truly chilling. The year was 1431, and a jeering crowd gathered at the old market square in the town of Rouen, France. Suddenly, a skinny 19-year-old girl was brought forward. With her shaved head and emaciated frame, it would have been hard to recognize the girl who had defied one king and crowned another. As the crowd laughed and jeered, the girl was tied to a large stake. Her only comfort in that hopeless moment was a simple wooden crucifix she held tight to her chest. As she looked up at the sky for the last time, a fire was set and the flames began to rise. This was the end for Joan d'Arc, or as she would be known to history, Joan of Arc. But who was Joan? How did a random peasant girl become the savior of France, so dangerous to her enemies that they were forced to burn her at the stake? Joan's life was full of mystery and surprises. She was born to a simple French peasant family in 1412, born during the 100 Years' War. At this time, the English army had control over large swaths of France, including Paris itself. Little is known about Joan's early life. However, it's written that at age 13, she received her first message from God. She was tasked with a holy mission to drive the English from her homeland and to help raise the Dauphin of France, Charles, to his proper place as king. By the way, Dauphin means dolphin in French, but the term also refers to the heir to the French throne. He was called the Dauphin because he had a dolphin on his coat of arms, not because he was one. Much like how the Prince of Wales isn't actually a whale, the more you know. Anyway, at age 16, Joan approached a French military commander who was about to attack the English. She told him that God had given her a vision of French victory in the battle to come. Spurred on by this encouragement, the Dauphin's forces did indeed win the battle, and Joan began to grow a dedicated following. Part of this was due to a popular prophecy at the time that a virgin maiden would lead France to freedom and victory over the English oppressors and end the 100 Years' War. While the French royalty was skeptical of her claim to be this chosen one, the common soldiers came to believe it, and her very presence would inspire them to victory after victory.
I am the drum on which God is beating out his message.
For the next year, her claim would be tested as she continued to demand an audience with the Dauphin himself. However, she was mostly ignored by the few French lords she managed to secure audiences with. Many didn't believe her claims that she was chosen by God for a holy mission. Even in the 15th century, that sounded a little nuts. Still, Joan would not be ignored. As more and more soldiers rallied to her, it became impossible for the lords and knights to write her off. Finally, the garrison captain at Valancourt agreed to help Joan travel to meet the Dauphin himself at his court in Chinon. At age 17, Joan was about to be received by the prince, but the real struggle was just beginning. It took 11 days to travel to the court, where Charles made her wait an additional 2 days before she was finally admitted. For the next few weeks, Joan was questioned nonstop about her claim to speak for God. Eventually, she was invited to talk to the Dauphin in private in a one-on-one meeting. What was discussed between the two has been lost to history, but we do know that Charles was extremely impressed with the young warrior maiden. According to his account, she seemed to hear his innermost thoughts, as well as details about the war no mere peasant could possibly know. This included things that the Dauphin claimed he had only told God in his most private moments. Needless to say, he was pretty sold on her power as both a symbol to his people and even an agent of divine intervention. Now, viewer, obviously there is no proof that Joan had a direct line to the Almighty. This aspect of her history has been the subject of much debate amongst the religious and agnostic alike. It's also possible that in the centuries since her life and death, these tales have been embellished, mythologized, and outright fabricated. However, it's very clear that Joan herself fully believed in her divine inspiration, and she carried that belief so strongly that it clearly made others around her believe. She was persuasive, confident, self-assured, and stood as a self-appointed equal amongst the most powerful men of the time. All this helped her gain a strong following among the peasantry, and eventually, the French nobility. Finally, with the Dauphin of France by her side, she would become the figure we know today. However, despite Joan's divine visions, she would also end up becoming a friend to a devil in disguise. Among the French court was Gilles de Rais. This French noble was a military commander of some renown, but one who harbored a dark secret. The truth about Gilles de Rais wouldn't come out until after Joan's death, so we'll talk more about him later. After her meeting at the French court, Joan's claims that she was both divine and a virgin were verified independently by members of the clergy and a group of women. With the 17-year-old being declared a proper Catholic and not a consort of the devil, the Dauphin agreed to formally endorse Joan's crusade to save France. He commissioned a brand new set of plate armor, something unheard of for a woman of the time. Joan also had her own banner made. She would later describe the banner herself during her trial. "I had a standard whose field was sown with lilies. There was a figure of Christ holding the world, and on each side of him was an angel. It was made of a white fabric called boucassin, written above, Jesus Maria, as it seemed to me, and it was fringed in silk." It's a pretty eye-catching look for a young woman amongst the hardened soldiers of the French army, and that was the point. Joan was not a soldier or a commander, but rather an icon of inspiration. Her presence would make the devout Catholic French army feel that they had literal proof that God was on their side, which made them fight harder and longer. Whether the voice she heard was God really doesn't matter. She believed in it, and her men did too. Joan would get her first taste of battle at Orleans.
Bye-bye, boys! Have fun storming the castle!
The French city had been under siege by English forces and was in danger of falling. Orleans was a stronghold, and the French couldn't afford to lose it. Over the next weeks, Joan would be seen riding and waving her banner amid some of the most intense fighting, her brand new plate armor shining like a beacon of hope amongst the carnage and chaos of the battlefield. She was joined by her new ally, Gilles de Rais. Together, the pair helped lead the French army to a major victory over their English occupiers, securing Orleans and turning the tide of the 100 Years' War. As a reward for this victory, Gilles de Rais was promoted by the Dauphin to the position of Marshal of France, the highest distinction in the French military. Joan herself had also cemented her legacy and her position as an icon of the French people. While she never carried a sword or engaged in direct combat herself, she was fearless in staying close to the front lines where she was most needed. She was even injured at least twice during her short military career. Most notably, she took a crossbow bolt to her shoulder at Orleans. After Orleans, Joan helped lead the French army to several more stunning victories. She also heavily advocated that the Dauphin be properly anointed the one true king of France. Charles was finally crowned on July 17, 1429. With Joan herself present and playing a symbolic role in the ceremony, a moment that was later immortalized in a famous painting in 1894. After the coronation, Joan and other military leaders urged the new king to fight to take back Paris itself. The city was the proper seat of the king and had long been under control of the English. Joan was tasked with helping to lead the siege in September of 1429. There she was injured by a bolt to the thigh and had to be rescued after several hours stuck between the lines of attack. The campaign was a failure, resulting in around 1,500 dead on the French side. King Charles ordered a retreat, much to Joan's displeasure. She was confident that victory would come eventually. However, Charles felt the cost would be too great. This was the first and biggest falling out between the two, and it would be the seed that eventually led to Joan's downfall. Joan would continue to lead and inspire the French army until her capture in 1430. She had been sent to help French forces against the Duke of Burgundy, who was claiming French territory with a mercenary army. Joan even went against the king's explicit truce when she led a French force to liberate a village from the opposing force. The attack failed, and Joan was captured and later surrendered to the English and their allies. They decided to put her on trial. but you might be surprised what she was actually charged with. Joan was interrogated relentlessly about her supposed heresy. She never broke under the questioning. She insisted she only followed the will of God, and that she was loyal to the church, and that she would never disobey the Pope. Eventually, her prosecutors found a loophole. They forced her to sign a document affirming her loyalty to the church, but there was a secret clause she didn't read. She had to stop wearing men's clothes. It's always the fine print that gets you. A few days later, Joan was caught wearing men's clothes in her cell. That's the crime they ultimately convicted her of. She was condemned to burn for wearing pants. This sentence was carried out in front of a large crowd in the town of Rouen. Joan was granted her request to have a large cross hoisted above the crowd, so she could look upon it till the very end. Joan's brutal martyrdom only further galvanized French forces, who would eventually overthrow their would-be conquerors. A few decades later, an inquest and retrial by the now victorious French monarchy absolved Joan of her crimes. She would later go on to become a saint. Her one-time comrade and fellow soldier Gilles would receive the opposite attention, however. After years of serving under King Charles of France, the nature and nauseating details of his crimes were uncovered. Through an investigation and later trial, it was discovered that he had dispatched around 100 children in horrific and depraved fashion at his castle. Joan's friend was one of the earliest recorded serial killers. For his crime, he was sentenced to be burned to death, a fate similar to his former friend. However, no sainthood would be waiting for Gilles de Rais, just the harsh judgment of history. And that's the life and death of one of history's most important women and a figure who would inspire a nation to freedom. Joan of Arc is remembered today as a semi-mythological figure. However, in the end, she was also a 19-year-old girl who had the courage to face the most powerful men of her time to the very end. Thank you for watching History Snob, and stay tuned for more great videos about some of history's most famous and infamous figures.